For thousands of years, one of the most valuable substances on Earth was not gold, not spice, and not even precious stone. It was a single unbroken thread, spun from the cocoon of a small moth, so fine that entire caravans risked death crossing deserts and mountains just to carry it westward. Emperors guarded its secret with their lives. Nations rose on the wealth it generated, and at least one empire nearly went to war over who was allowed to know how it was made. This is the story of silk, the luxury thread that quietly connected the ancient world. Picture a single cocoon, no larger than a fingertip, holding inside it a thread that could stretch, if fully unwound, for nearly 1,000 meters, longer than most modern city blocks. From that one small, unremarkable object came a fiber so lustrous, so strong, and so impossibly soft that it would eventually be worth more than its weight in gold across half the ancient world. For over 2,000 years, only one civilization on Earth knew exactly how to produce it, and they intended to keep it that way for as long as humanly possible. Legend places the discovery of silk in China sometime around 2700 BCE in the garden of an empress named Lei Su, the wife of the mythical Yellow Emperor. According to the story, a cocoon fell from a mulberry tree into her cup of hot tea, and as she watched, the heat began to loosen a single continuous thread that unspooled from the cocoon with astonishing length and shine. Whether or not the tale is literally true, archaeologists have confirmed that silk production in China stretches back remarkably far, with silk fragments and tools for reeling thread discovered at sites dating to the Neolithic period. Thousands of years before any other civilization on the planet had the faintest idea such a fiber existed. What made silk so extraordinary was not just its beauty, but the extraordinary complexity required to produce it. The silkworm at the heart of the process, the caterpillar of the domesticated moth known as Bombyx mori, does not simply appear in nature, ready for harvest. In fact, over thousands of years of selective breeding, this creature became so thoroughly domesticated that it can no longer survive on its own in the wild at all. It has lost the ability to fly, and it depends entirely on human care for every stage of its brief life. Chinese farmers had to cultivate entire mulberry orchards, since the silkworm caterpillar eats nothing but mulberry leaves, and feed the voracious larvae almost constantly through their brief life cycle, sometimes requiring fresh leaves delivered every few hours as the caterpillars grew. Once each caterpillar spun its cocoon, workers had to carefully unreel the thread before the moth inside could emerge and break it, since a broken cocoon yielded only short, tangled fibers rather than one long continuous strand. This meant most cocoons had to be steamed or boiled while the pupa was still inside, a step that ended the insect's life in order to preserve the integrity of the thread it had spun. It was slow, meticulous, and deeply skilled labor, refined over countless generations, requiring an intimate understanding of temperature, humidity, timing, and the precise moment at which a cocoon was ready to be unwound. For most of ancient history, China alone possessed this knowledge, an accumulated body of expertise so specialized that entire families devoted themselves to silk cultivation across many generations.
You must be gentle, like this. Feel the thread.
That's it, sweetheart. Keep it steady.
Passing down closely held techniques the way other cultures might pass down a trade secret or a family recipe. The Chinese state understood exactly what it had. Silk production techniques, from raising the worms to reeling and weaving the thread, were treated as closely guarded state secrets, protected under penalty of death. Anyone caught attempting to smuggle silkworm eggs, mulberry seeds, or detailed knowledge of the process out of Chinese territory faced execution, a punishment severe enough to keep the secret largely intact for well over 2,000 years. This near-total monopoly transformed silk from a mere fabric into something closer to a strategic resource, one that Chinese emperors could use to reward loyalty, fund armies, and quietly project influence across an enormous stretch of Asia. That influence traveled outward along a sprawling network of trade routes that would eventually earn the name the Silk Road. Though no ancient traveler ever called it that themselves, the term was actually coined by a German geographer many centuries later in the 19th century, long after the routes he was describing had already faded from their peak importance. Beginning in earnest around the 2nd century before the Common Era, Chinese silk began moving west through Central Asia, passing through oasis cities like Kashgar, Samarkand, and Bukhara, cities that grew fabulously wealthy simply by sitting along the route silk merchants needed to cross. And through mountain passes so treacherous that entire caravans sometimes vanished into snowstorms.
Move! Keep moving! Do not stop now!
Never to be heard from again. No single trader ever carried silk the entire distance from China to Rome. Instead, the fabric passed along a relay of hands, Chinese merchants to Central Asian intermediaries, to Persian traders, to Levantine and eventually Mediterranean merchants.
20% is too high for the silk, considering the season. The quality is unmatched. 15% and we have a deal. Heave that line to the mainmast now.
Each link adding its own markup, until the silk that began as a modest local commodity in China arrived in Rome worth an almost unbelievable fortune, sometimes described by ancient writers as being worth its weight in gold, a phrase that in silk's case was not simply a figure of speech, but a literal description of market prices at certain points along the route. Alongside silk itself, these same roads carried spices, precious stones, religious ideas, artistic techniques, and even diseases, making the Silk Road one of the very first channels through which the ancient world became genuinely, if slowly, interconnected. When silk finally reached the Roman world, it created something close to a sensation. Roman writers described the fabric with a mixture of fascination and moral concern, marveling at its delicate translucence, while worrying aloud that it revealed too much of the body beneath it, scandalizing conservative senators who considered such transparency inappropriate for respectable citizens. The philosopher and statesman Seneca reportedly complained that silk garments could hardly be called clothing at all, since they concealed neither the body nor, in his view, a person's modesty, a complaint that reveals just how differently silk was perceived compared to the heavier, more concealing wool and linen fabrics Romans had always known. Despite these objections, demand for silk only grew, and wealthy Romans paid staggering sums to acquire it, sums so large that concerned officials periodically tried to restrict silk imports, fearing the drain of Roman gold and silver, flowing endlessly eastward to pay for a fabric none of them knew how to produce themselves. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder went so far as to complain, in his sprawling encyclopedia of natural history, that Rome was hemorrhaging an almost unimaginable sum of money every year to pay for silk, spices, and other luxuries from the East, framing it as a genuine drain on the empire's wealth, and in his view a symptom of moral decline brought on by an excessive appetite for foreign extravagance.
While we debate the price of grain, they drown in Falernian wine. Rome demands better. This is insolence. Arrest him!
His complaints did little to slow demand.
I'll give you 60.
Over here, good sir. We have waited long enough.
If anything, silk's expense only heightened its appeal among an aristocracy eager to display status through conspicuous consumption, a pattern of behavior that, it turns out, has repeated itself in nearly every wealthy society throughout human history. For centuries, the mystery of silk's true origin remained frustratingly incomplete, even among sophisticated Roman thinkers. Some believe silk grew on trees, imagining some kind of fine botanical wool similar to cotton. Others speculated it was somehow combed from the leaves of a forest, an idea that persisted in various forms for generations. The Chinese, for their part, had little interest in correcting these misconceptions. As long as Rome remained ignorant of the true process, China's monopoly and the enormous wealth it generated remained safely intact. That monopoly finally began to crack, though not through Roman ingenuity, but through the ambitions of intermediary powers along the trade route itself. Persia, positioned directly between China and the markets of the Mediterranean, developed its own silk weaving industry by importing raw Chinese silk thread and finishing it locally, adding distinctly Persian patterns and techniques while still depending entirely on China for the raw material itself. This arrangement gave Persia enormous leverage as a middleman, allowing Persian merchants to control prices and access for the wealthy Byzantine and Roman markets further west, a position of power that would eventually provoke serious tension with the Byzantine Empire, which grew increasingly frustrated at paying Persian intermediaries for a fabric it desperately wanted to produce on its own terms. The true turning point came in the 6th century of the Common Era, and it involved what may be one of history's most consequential acts of industrial espionage. According to accounts from Byzantine historians, the Emperor Justinian, eager to break Persia's stranglehold on the silk trade and free his empire from paying inflated Persian prices during a period of near-constant political tension between the two powers, sponsored 2 Christian monks who had previously traveled through Central Asia and reportedly witnessed silk production firsthand. Justinian sent them back east with a singular mission: to smuggle silkworm eggs out of China and bring them safely to Constantinople, a journey of thousands of miles across some of the most difficult terrain on the planet. The monks reportedly succeeded by hiding silkworm eggs inside hollow bamboo walking canes, carrying this fragile cargo across mountain passes, deserts, and countless border checkpoints,
Your papers, monk. Here they are, Captain. We seek safe passage.
evading detection the entire way despite laws that would have meant execution if they had been caught.
Open this crate. What are you hiding?
It is only silk. I told you already, the tax is too high.
It is a story almost cinematic in its audacity. 2 men risking their lives not for gold or territory, but for a handful of tiny eggs small enough to fit inside a walking stick. Eggs that carried within them the power to upend an economic order that had held firm for over 2,000 years. When the monks finally arrived back in Constantinople and the eggs successfully hatched, China's exclusive monopoly on silk production, protected for well over 2,000 years, was effectively broken in a single covert operation. The Byzantine Empire quickly established its own mulberry orchards and silk workshops, tightly controlled by the imperial court itself, which understood exactly how valuable this new capability was and moved swiftly to keep production centralized under state supervision. Silk production began spreading gradually westward from Byzantine territory into other parts of the Mediterranean world, no longer entirely dependent on the long, expensive journey along the Silk Road from China itself. From Byzantium, knowledge of silk cultivation slowly diffused further west, carried by conquest, trade, and migration. Arab expansion in the 7th and 8th centuries helped spread silk production techniques across the Middle East and eventually into parts of North Africa and Muslim Spain, regions that developed their own distinctive silk weaving traditions, blending inherited Chinese techniques with local artistic styles. By the time the medieval period reached its height, several Italian city-states had recognized an extraordinary opportunity. Cities like Lucca and later Venice, Florence, and Genoa began cultivating mulberry trees and developing sophisticated silk workshops of their own, positioning Italy as Europe's dominant silk producer for centuries to come. Lucca in particular became renowned throughout medieval Europe for the quality of its silk, its skilled weavers guarding their own techniques almost as jealously as China once had, protecting valuable trade secrets through guild regulations that restricted who could learn the craft and under what conditions, sometimes forbidding skilled weavers from leaving the city at all, out of fear that they might carry prized techniques to a rival town. Political instability in Lucca during the 14th century eventually scattered many of its silk artisans to other Italian cities, inadvertently spreading expertise that had once been jealously confined to a single location. And cities like Florence and Venice absorbed these displaced weavers, building their own formidable silk industries in the process. Venice, already a dominant maritime trading power thanks to its control over Mediterranean shipping routes, used its existing commercial networks to become one of Europe's great silk trading hubs, importing raw silk from the eastern Mediterranean and finishing it in workshops staffed by highly specialized craftsmen. Wealthy Italian merchant families built extraordinary fortunes on silk, financing art, architecture, and political power that would help fuel the cultural explosion of the Italian Renaissance. Families like the Medici in Florence, whose banking fortune was deeply intertwined with the textile trade, used wealth generated in part through silk and wool commerce to commission some of the most celebrated paintings, sculptures, and buildings in Western art history.
Look at how the light hits the Christ child.
Truly divine.
It is not an exaggeration to say that some of history's most celebrated art and architecture exists today, in part because of profits generated by silk workshops centuries earlier. Silk's spread was not confined to the Mediterranean world alone. Far to the east, Japan had also acquired silk cultivation techniques, likely through contact with China and Korea in the early centuries of the Common Era, gradually developing its own silk industry that would remain largely inward-facing for well over 1,000 years, focused on domestic use and regional trade, rather than the sprawling international markets that define China's relationship with the fabric. Korea similarly developed a robust silk tradition of its own, weaving silk into court fashion and religious ceremony in ways that reflected distinctly Korean aesthetic sensibilities, rather than simply copying Chinese styles wholesale. Back in Europe, as silk cultivation techniques slowly spread beyond Italy, France emerged as an unexpected new center of the industry, largely through deliberate royal policy rather than organic growth. In the 16th century, French kings, eager to reduce the enormous sums flowing to Italy for imported silk, actively encouraged mulberry cultivation and silk weaving within France itself. The city of Lyon became the beating heart of this new French silk industry, eventually developing such sophisticated weaving technology that Lyon silk workshops became famous across Europe.
Regardez cette qualité. C'est le plus beau damas de soie que Lyon ait jamais produit. Une vraie merveille, n'est-ce pas?
C'est magnifique.
For producing patterns of extraordinary intricacy, rivaling anything China or Italy had ever produced. It was in Lyon, in fact, that one of the most important technological breakthroughs in textile history quietly took shape. In the early 19th century, a French inventor named Joseph-Marie Jacquard developed a mechanical loom capable of weaving extraordinarily complex patterns using a system of punch cards that controlled which threads were raised or lowered during weaving. The Jacquard loom dramatically reduced the time and cost required to produce elaborately patterned silk, allowing designs that once required painstaking manual coordination between weaver and assistant to be reproduced mechanically and repeatably. Few people realize that this same punched card system, designed to automate silk pattern weaving, would later directly inspire early computing pioneers, who recognized in Jacquard's mechanism one of the first practical demonstrations of programmable machinery, a conceptual thread, quite literally, connecting silk weaving to the digital age that followed centuries later. Silk's story in the 19th century, however, was not one of uninterrupted triumph. A devastating disease known as pebrine began ravaging European silkworm populations in the 1840s and 1850s, spreading through France and Italy with alarming speed and threatening to collapse the entire European silk industry within a single generation. Infected silkworms grew sluggish, developed strange dark spots across their bodies, and frequently died before ever completing their cocoons. And worse still, nobody at the time understood what was causing it.
Look at them, they are dying by the hour. We must do something.
I don't know what else to try. The treatments are useless. It is spreading too quickly. We are lost.
Or how to stop it from spreading from one generation of eggs to the next. Entire regions that had depended on silk cultivation for centuries watched their harvests collapse year after year, threatening not just individual fortunes, but the broader economic stability of silk-producing regions across France and Italy. Silk producers, desperate and increasingly panicked.
If this continues, we will lose everything. There will be nothing left.
Panic will solve nothing, monsieur. We must isolate the infected stock immediately.
Eventually turned to the French chemist Louis Pasteur, already known for his groundbreaking work in microbiology.
The disease is spreading too quickly, Master Pasteur. We are losing everything.
Look at them, sir. They are dying before they spin.
And asked him to investigate the mysterious illness devastating their livelihoods. Pasteur's careful research identified microscopic parasites responsible for the disease and developed methods to identify and eliminate infected eggs before they could spread the illness further, examining silkworm eggs under a microscope and discarding any that showed signs of contamination. effectively saving the French silk industry from total collapse. This episode is remembered today as one of the pivotal early triumphs of germ theory, a scientific principle Pasteur would go on to apply to far broader problems in human and animal disease, an unexpected legacy for a crisis that began with nothing more than sick caterpillars in the French countryside. Even as Pasteur helped rescue European silk production, the global center of the silk industry was quietly shifting once again, this time toward Japan. Following the Meiji Restoration in 1868, Japan embarked on a rapid and deliberate program of industrial modernization, determined to close the technological and economic gap that had left it vulnerable to Western pressure in previous decades, and silk became one of the cornerstones of this transformation. The Japanese government invested heavily in modern, mechanized silk reeling facilities, most famously the Tomioka silk mill, importing European technology and adapting it to dramatically increase both the scale and consistency of silk production while training a new generation of factory workers, many of them young women recruited from rural farming families across the country. Within just a few decades, Japan transformed from a relatively minor regional silk producer into the largest silk exporter in the entire world, generating enormous revenue that helped fund the broader industrialization of the Japanese economy, including its rapidly modernizing military and infrastructure. Silk exports effectively became one of the primary engines financing Japan's astonishingly fast transition from an isolated feudal society into a major industrial and military power within the span of a single lifetime, a transformation few nations in history have matched in speed. Japanese silk found an eager market across the Pacific in the United States, where American consumers developed a particular appetite for silk stockings, a fashion phenomenon that helped drive explosive demand throughout the early 20th century. For a time, silk stockings became such a significant cultural and economic phenomenon that shifts in silk pricing and availability made regular headlines in American newspapers, a level of public attention that seems almost unimaginable for a single fabric today. That golden era for natural silk, however, was approaching an unexpected and rapid end. In the late 1930s, chemists at the American company DuPont unveiled a revolutionary new synthetic fiber called nylon, engineered entirely from petroleum-based chemicals rather than grown by any living creature. Nylon was marketed with dramatic flair, described in advertisements as being stronger than steel, yet finer than a spider's web, and it was almost immediately positioned as a direct competitor to silk, particularly in the booming stocking and hosiery market
Thinner than silk and wear twice as long.
My goodness, they feel marvelous.
that had made silk such a fixture of everyday fashion. When nylon stockings first went on public sale in 1940,
I've never seen anything like it.
They say they're stronger than steel.
demand was so overwhelming that stores across the United States reported crowds lining up before opening, eager to buy a product that promised the elegance of silk without its fragility or expense. The timing could hardly have been worse for silk's global trade. As the Second World War erupted across the Pacific and Europe, the United States found itself at war with Japan, its primary source of natural silk. Severing supply lines almost overnight. Silk, once so central to fashion and commerce, was suddenly redirected entirely toward military use, woven into parachutes, powder bags, and other wartime equipment, prized for its strength and lightness at a moment when every ounce of a soldier's or pilot's equipment mattered enormously, while nylon rapidly filled the civilian void silk left behind. When the war ended, silk never fully reclaimed its former dominance in everyday clothing. Nylon, along with other synthetic fibers developed in the following decades, proved cheaper, more durable, and far easier to mass produce at industrial scale, permanently reshaping the global textile landscape in ways silk producers could not have imagined just a generation earlier. And yet, silk did not disappear. It simply changed its role. Rather than competing with synthetic fibers on price or everyday practicality, silk repositioned itself firmly within the world of luxury, prestige, and craftsmanship, precisely the qualities that had made it so valuable to ancient Roman aristocrats and medieval European nobility in the first place. Today, silk remains deeply associated with high fashion, formal wear, and fine textiles, produced predominantly in China, which remains by far the world's largest silk producer, alongside significant production in India, Uzbekistan, Thailand, and Brazil. China's return to global silk dominance carries a certain quiet symmetry. A civilization that once guarded this secret for 2,000 years under threat of execution now leads the world in silk production once again, though this time in an open, globally interconnected market rather than behind the walls of imperial secrecy. Modern science has also opened entirely new chapters in silk's ongoing story. Researchers around the world have become fascinated by spider silk, a related but distinct fiber possessing extraordinary strength and elasticity that exceeds even traditional silkworm silk. Ounce for ounce, reportedly stronger than steel and tougher than Kevlar, and scientists have spent decades attempting to reproduce its remarkable properties synthetically, hoping to apply it to everything from medical sutures and wound dressings to advanced protective materials for soldiers and athletes alike. Spiders themselves prove too territorial and cannibalistic to farm the way silkworms can be, so researchers have instead turned to genetic engineering, inserting spider silk genes into bacteria, yeast, and even goats in an effort to produce the protein at meaningful scale outside of a spider's own body. Biotechnology researchers have similarly experimented with genetically modifying silkworms themselves, coaxing them to produce fibers with entirely new properties never found in nature, from fluorescent threads to silk infused with spider silk proteins, a strange and fascinating continuation of humanity's 5,000-year relationship with this single remarkable insect and the thread it produces. What began as a chance discovery in an ancient Chinese garden has, across 5 millennia, evolved into a field of active genetic research, proof that even the oldest human technologies can still find new relevance in each successive era. Today, if you happen to touch a silk scarf, a tie, or an elegant evening gown, you are holding a fragment of one of the longest and most consequential trade stories in human history. That single shimmering thread once justified smuggling operations sanctioned by emperors, financed some of the greatest art and architecture of the Italian Renaissance, quietly inspired the earliest principles of programmable machinery, and helped launch one of the founding breakthroughs of modern medical science. It began as a closely hoarded secret inside the walls of ancient China and ended up woven, in one form or another, into nearly every chapter of the modern world that followed. Few threads in human history have connected so many distant civilizations, so many centuries apart, quite so completely as this one. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden history behind everyday materials, consider subscribing for more documentary stories that reveal how ordinary objects shaped extraordinary civilizations.